I'd like to get into a more general subject here that is certainly central to discussing the rise and growth of Central Intelligence Agency and the secret team in the person of Allen Dulles. You write at one point that Allen Dulles was a counterpuncher and a missionary. He was a meddler. He thought that he had the right and the duty to bring his pet schemes into the minds and homes of others, whether they were wanted or not. And I'd like you to just sort of in general discuss this mind of this man, Allen Dulles. Why do you think he felt he had the right to do all these things, and how do you think he justified this in his own mind?
In order to get to the root of that, we have to recall that as a young man, just graduated from Princeton, I believe, he went to Paris with the Wilson Peace Conference group right after World War I. That is a pretty rich way for a young college graduate to begin his work in international affairs. And I'm sure that that experience had much to do with the rest of his life. John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles were both senior directors of the biggest law firm in New York City at the time, Sullivan Cromwell. And their earlier work, of course, made them very valuable to that international law firm, and also brought them into the law firm's business throughout the world. And the way they handled business on the international scale is very much shaped by their experience with Sullivan Cromwell. Mm-hmm. Now, the Sullivan Cromwell offices had the major U.S. legal contacts in Germany during Hitler's period. We couldn't say they were essentially pro-Nazi, but they didn't close their office in Germany till well after the start of World War I. In fact, the fact that they were still there when the war was going became quite an embarrassment to the U.S. government to think that here we were very anti-Hitler, anti-Axis, and here we had this major law firm still operating there. Well, this law firm was in a sense dominated by these Dulles brothers whose idea of international affairs and international business was shaped by the law firm and then by their activities. At the same time, John Foster Dulles was either a founder of the World Council of Churches or one of its major guiding spirits. Whenever he was not in the government or otherwise assigned to some mission, he traveled all over the world as a principal spokesman for the World Council of Churches. Now, I make no brief for the Dulles view of the churches or even of their religion. It was rather, I think it was Episcopalian really, but I'm not sure. But this was the platform upon which the Dulles brothers spoke many, many times around the world. And in that sense, they turned their political views, their financial views, their diplomatic views into an essentially missionary spirit. They felt that wherever they went, they were bringing the word of the United States, the word of capitalism, what have you, around the world with them. This was very true in the period right after World War II, and may have had something to do with Truman's selection of Allen Dulles to study the intelligence agency, because if anyone was accustomed to international affairs, intelligence activities, covert activity, because of his OSS experience, Allen Dulles certainly was. And you put these all together, and regardless of the individual himself or his family relationships, which were strong, of course, because both his brother and sister were strong in the State Department, you produce a person called Allen Dulles who is a missionary, a diplomat, a financier, a lawyer, a really unusual individual for this period. Then you bring him into the government as the director of the Central Intelligence Organization of the country, and he calls upon all this background. Well, from my experience with him, which for 7 or 8 years was rather considerable, you could feel this power in the man, that this was the way he worked. And he felt that he had a perfect right to preach capitalism as he saw it, or anti-communism, that's a big word, as he saw it, throughout the world. And it was people like Allen Dulles who really created the North-South confrontation, you know, or and East-West between communism, but the North-South with the third world countries. And either they should shape up with us or they were them. You know, there's no black in the middle, no area in the middle where they could ignore. There were no neutrals. Remember back in the old days when India tried very hard to be a neutral country and just wouldn't permit them. They had to be communist, they had to be capitalist, either way. Well, this is the nature of Dulles. And when you worked with him, there was nothing. It was either communism or the West. And you can't describe precisely these things, but it's in all the literature since World War II. It's in all of everything we were doing. And the agency was motivated along those lines, and especially as you saw Dulles move into these things that we were talking about, that's through his ability to control the morning briefings, guiding the government along this reactive channel. Because when Dulles became the director of Central Intelligence, one of the first things he did in the agency was to abolish the DDA. We've talked about the DDS, the support and the logistics. We've talked about DDP, the clandestine operation. And, of course, DDI was the Deputy Director of Intelligence, which is the ordinary intelligence business. But it had a DDA. DDA was administration, planning, management. He abolished that. He saw no use for it. You see? If he saw no use for management, planning, administration, that role in the agency, then you can see that what he was going to do is let his eyes and ears, his intelligence area, his covert area, find things to do and then do something. So he would react to things. And with that system that he applied, he brought it into the government so that the first thing you know, after several years, the government itself was becoming a government of reaction. And this is the one thing about having a CIA in a government like ours that makes it very dominant. It assumes the title without even trying, because it's easy to correspond to reacting. You know, if you get punched, you punch back. That's easy. This is Mr. Dulles in a nutshell. And his shadow, having fallen over the government for so many years, has created a government which does react rather than become dynamic. And I think that this is very true in the last decade of our government, if nothing else. And I think it is this straitjacket that Kennedy was trying to remove from the office of the presidency. And I think Kennedy was definitely making moves to rid the government from this reactive motivation. Of course, he fired Dulles. That's one first step.
After he initially, as soon as he was elected, said he would take him on, but he didn't see yet what would happen until something like the Bay of Pigs came along.
Yeah.
To make him wary of that.
Well, and I think Kennedy, having a great confidence in his own ability to handle things, realized that he didn't have to fight the 10 rounds of the championship bout all at once. He'd take them in order. And I think he lined up the campaign that he saw through his first 4 years as a chance to begin to really take over the government in his name and in what he wanted to do. And in his latter 4 years, make moves that would set history for many, many years. And, of course, as a lot of people have pointed out, he had Bobby in the wings and Teddy in the wings and then their children in the wings. They would have had Kennedys for years. At least that's a light way to look at it. But Kennedy, I think, rebelled against this business of the reaction to things. He wanted to do some things. And this, of course, put him in direct conflict with Allen Dulles and with the CIA and with that method of operation, which really dated back to Walter Beetle Smith, too. Walter Beetle Smith is the one who started the pre-briefing, so we must not say that this was truly Dulles' origin. This is important for historians. They should go back a little further and see that Walter Beetle Smith, who was Eisenhower's closest confidant during World War II, who left that job to become ambassador to the Soviet Union, which is quite an unusual assignment. and then came directly from being the ambassador in the Soviet Union to be the director of Central Intelligence, should not be overlooked for the enormous role that he played. And then he stepped down from being the DCI to be the deputy to John Foster Dulles, so that Allen Dulles could move into the slot in the DCI. I would not say that the Dulles brothers formed all this themselves. I would say that Walter Beadle Smith and his associates, including Eisenhower, had a lot to do with this.
Even though it was Truman in 1950 who recalled Beadle Smith from Moscow to take over the CIA once there was this hue and cry in the country about how we'd been caught with our pants down in Korea when the invasion happened, and we were...
That's true, and I think that is a part of the greater problem of how the whole country, how the whole world rolled over from the alliances of World War II into the Cold War, World War III, Cold War, of being anti-communist and Pavlovian anti-communist, unreasonable anti-communism. Everything that we didn't like was anti-communist right away. Anything the Soviets did was against the West, and to create that direct opposition right out of the ashes of World War II, and for what most people would say are very unreasonable reasons. Nothing that they had done in Moscow that changed things. They had been our allies, and all of a sudden we're opposed to them. So, but what I want to do is I don't want to leave with anyone the idea that this began solely with Dulles. Dulles perfected it, of course, and Dulles was the epitome of the person that fit that role. But he was not the first man. Beadle Smith was ahead of him.
We've discussed this briefly before.